They messed with the wrong kid. The bullies never saw this fighter coming. Marcus Okafor stood at the entrance of Westbrook High School, his worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. At 16, he was lanky and awkward, all knees and elbows that seemed to move independently of his body. His second-hand clothes hung loosely on his thin frame, and his thick Nigerian accent made him an instant target. He'd only been in America for 6 months, and this was his third school, after his family fled Lagos following his father's death. What nobody at Westbrook knew was that Marcus had spent the last 8 years training in Dambe, the ancient Nigerian martial art his grandfather had taught him since he was 8 years old. The cafeteria buzzed with its usual chaos when Marcus entered, clutching his tray of mystery meat and overcooked vegetables. He kept his head down, searching for an empty table in the corner where he could eat in peace. That's when he heard the voice that had haunted him for the past 2 weeks since he'd started at Westbrook. "Hey, look who it is! The African prince is gracing us with his presence!" Brett Hawkins called out, his voice dripping with mockery. The senior linebacker stood 6'3" and weighed at least 200 pounds of pure muscle. His buddies, Tyler Morrison and Jake Brennan, flanked him like hyenas circling prey. Brett's blue eyes gleamed with the kind of cruelty that came from never being told no in his entire life. Marcus ignored them, continuing toward the empty table. He'd learned that engaging only made things worse. In Nigeria, he would have handled this differently, but his mother had begged him to keep a low profile. They couldn't afford any trouble that might jeopardize their visa status, so he swallowed his pride and kept walking. "I'm talking to you, monkey boy." Brett's hand slammed down on Marcus's tray, sending food flying across his shirt. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Marcus stood there, mashed potatoes sliding down his chest, his hands trembling not with fear, but with the effort of restraint. In his mind, he could see exactly how he would strike. A swift elbow to Brett's solar plexus, followed by a knee to the face as he doubled over. But he couldn't. "Not here, not now." "Sorry, I didn't hear you," Marcus said quietly, his accent making the words sound formal and strange to American ears. This only made Brett laugh harder. "Sorry, I didn't hear you," Brett mimicked in an exaggerated accent. "What's wrong, Kunta Kinte? Don't they teach you English in the jungle?" Marcus walked away, leaving his ruined lunch behind. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, some sympathetic but most just grateful it wasn't them. Sarah Chen, a girl from his chemistry class, gave him a small sad smile as he passed. Mr. Peterson, the lunch monitor, conveniently looked the other way, just as he always did when Brett was involved. The linebacker's father practically owned half the town, including the car dealership that sponsored the football team. The harassment continued daily, each incident more humiliating than the last. Brett and his crew would trip Marcus in the hallways, sending his books scattering. They'd steal his homework and tear it up in front of him. They spray-painted "Go Back to Africa" on his locker. Through it all, Marcus remained silent, his grandfather's words echoing in his mind. "A true warrior chooses his battles wisely. Strength without wisdom is just violence." But how much more can I take? Marcus wondered, as he sat alone in the library during lunch, avoiding the cafeteria entirely now. His grades were suffering because he spent more time dodging Brett than studying. His mother noticed the torn clothes and the bruises he tried to hide, but when she asked, he just said he was clumsy. She had enough to worry about, working 2 jobs to keep them afloat. 3 weeks into his torment, Marcus noticed something changing within himself. The meditation techniques his grandfather had taught him alongside the physical training were the only things keeping him sane. Every morning before school, he would go through his forms in the small apartment's living room, careful not to wake his mother and younger sister. The movements centered him, reminded him who he was beneath the scared, skinny kid everyone saw. It was a Thursday when things escalated beyond anything Marcus had experienced before. He'd made the mistake of scoring higher than Brett on a history test, the one subject where his education in Nigeria had actually put him ahead. Mrs. Davidson had announced the scores publicly, praising Marcus's essay on colonialism. Brett's face had turned an ugly shade of red. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Brett cornered him after class, Tyler and Jake blocking any escape route. "You think you're better than us?" "No, I just studied," Marcus replied, trying to edge past them. Brett shoved him hard against the lockers. "In this school, I'm the king. And you? You're nothing. You're less than nothing. You're a disease that needs to be eliminated." For a moment, Marcus felt something snap inside him. His hands curled into fists, his body automatically shifting into a fighting stance. Brett must have seen something in his eyes because he took a half step back before catching himself. "What? You want to fight me?" Brett laughed, but there was a hint of uncertainty now. Go ahead, throw a punch, give me a reason to destroy you. Not yet, Marcus told himself, forcing his body to relax. Not like this. He knew Brett was trying to provoke him into throwing the first punch, giving him an excuse to retaliate without consequences. I don't want any trouble, he said instead, his voice steady despite the rage boiling in his chest. That's what I thought, Brett sneered, but Marcus caught the flash of frustration in his eyes. The bully wanted a reaction, needed it to justify his behavior. By refusing to give him one, Marcus was denying him that satisfaction. The next day, Friday, started like any other. Marcus arrived early, hoping to avoid the morning gauntlet of harassment. He settled into his first period English class, placing his backpack carefully under his desk. He'd learned to keep it close after Brett's crew had dumped it in the toilet last week. The morning passed without incident, unusual enough to make Marcus nervous. Brett and his friends were nowhere to be seen during passing periods. Even lunch was peaceful, though Marcus still ate in the library, not trusting the calm. It wasn't until he returned to his afternoon classes that he understood why. Chemistry class was held in the lab on the second floor. Marcus entered to find the room already half full, students chatting and preparing for the experiment Mrs. Rodriguez had planned. He slid into his usual seat near the back, reaching for his backpack to retrieve his notebook. The moment he unzipped it, the smell hit him like a physical blow. The stench was overwhelming, causing several nearby students to gag and recoil. Marcus stared in horror at the contents of his bag. Someone had defecated inside it, the waste smeared over his books, his notebooks, the lunch his mother had lovingly prepared that morning. Everything was ruined, contaminated, destroyed. Oh my God, what is that smell? Someone shrieked. The entire class turned to look at Marcus, who sat frozen, his hands trembling as he held the soiled backpack. Then he heard it. Brett's distinctive laugh from across the room. Looks like someone couldn't hold it, Brett said loudly, his voice full of mock concern. Maybe they don't have toilets where he comes from. The rage that Marcus had been suppressing for weeks finally erupted, but it wasn't hot and wild, it was cold, focused, deadly. He stood slowly, setting the ruined backpack on the floor. His movements were different now, fluid and purposeful, like a predator that had finally decided to hunt. You did this, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent classroom. It wasn't a question. Brett stood up, flanked as always by Tyler and Jake. Prove it, Jungle Boy. Maybe you're just a dirty animal who doesn't know how to use a bathroom. Mrs. Rodriguez had stepped out to get supplies, leaving the class unsupervised. Several students pulled out their phones, sensing something momentous. It was about to happen. Sarah Chen looked worried, her eyes darting between Marcus and the door. For weeks I have let you humiliate me, Marcus said, walking slowly toward Brett. His accent seemed less pronounced now, his words carrying a weight that made several students step back. I stayed quiet because I thought it was the right thing to do, because I thought I was being wise. And now you're going to do what? Brett scoffed, but his body language had shifted. He recognized a threat when he saw one, even if he couldn't understand where this confidence was coming from. You going to cry to the principal? Run home to mommy? No, Marcus said simply. Now I'm going to teach you a lesson my grandfather taught me. Sometimes wisdom means knowing when to fight. Brett threw the first punch, a wild haymaker that would have knocked out most high school kids. But Marcus wasn't there anymore. He'd shifted minutely to the side, Brett's fist whistling past his ear. In the same motion, Marcus's hand shot out, catching Brett's wrist and using his momentum to send him stumbling forward. A swift kick, too. The back of Brett's knee brought the bigger boy crashing down. What the hell? Tyler rushed forward, only to meet Marcus's elbow in his solar plexus. The impact folded him in half, gasping for air. Jake came from the other side, trying to grab Marcus in a bear hug, but the Nigerian boy dropped low, sweeping Jake's legs and sending him tumbling over a desk. Brett was back on his feet, his face purple with rage and embarrassment. You're dead, he roared, charging like a bull. This time Marcus met him head-on. He deflected Brett's punch with his forearm, stepped inside his guard, and delivered a devastating combination. A palm strike to the nose, followed by a knee to the ribs, finished with an elbow to the temple. Brett went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. The entire fight had lasted less than 30 seconds. Marcus stood in the center of the classroom, barely breathing hard, while Brett's crew lay groaning on the floor. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of Brett's whimpering. In my country, Marcus said, addressing the stunned classroom, we have a saying, the fly that does not listen follows the corpse to the grave. I tried to be peaceful. I tried to be quiet. But you, he looked down at Brett, you wouldn't. Stop. You had to push and push until you found out what happens when you push too far. Brett tried to stand, his legs shaky. My dad will sue you. You'll be deported. You're finished. Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Your father can try, but first he'll have to explain why his son thought it was acceptable to defecate in another student's backpack. I wonder how that will play in court. Or in the media. He glanced at the phone, still recording. I'm sure this video will be very educational. Mrs. Rodriguez chose that moment to return, dropping her supplies at the sight of the chaos. What happened here? Brett and his friends attacked me, Marcus said calmly. I defended myself. You'll find the evidence of their harassment in my backpack. He pointed to the reeking bag. They filled it with human waste. The teacher's face went white as the smell hit her. She looked at Brett, who was trying to stem his bloody nose, then at Marcus, who stood tall despite his thin frame. Everyone to the principal's office, now! As they filed out, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. Sarah Chen smiled at him, her eyes bright with admiration. That was incredible. I can't believe you knew how to fight like that. My grandfather was a champion in Nigeria, Marcus explained. He taught me dambe, our traditional martial art, but he also taught me that fighting should always be the last option. Looks like you finally ran out of options, she said. The principal's office was a circus. Parents were called, statements were taken, and the video evidence was reviewed. Brett's father arrived in an expensive suit, threatening lawsuits and deportation, but his bluster faded when he saw the footage of his son's harassment and the revolting contents of Marcus's backpack. The other parents were equally horrified, especially when more students came forward with stories of Brett's bullying. In the end, Brett, Tyler, and Jake were suspended for 2 weeks and required to attend anger management counseling. Marcus received a warning about fighting on school property, but Principal Anderson privately told him he understood why he'd snapped. The backpack incident was particularly damning. It showed premeditation and a level of cruelty that couldn't be excused as boys being boys. Word spread through Westbrook High like wildfire. The quiet African kid who'd taken weeks of abuse had turned out to be a trained fighter who'd demolished the school's biggest bully in seconds. Marcus found himself suddenly visible in a way he'd never been before. Students who'd previously ignored him now nodded respectfully in the halls. Some even tried to befriend him, though Marcus remained cautious. A week later, Marcus was eating lunch in the cafeteria for the first time since the food tray incident. Sarah Chen sat across from him, along with a few other students who'd always been on the margins of Westbrook's social hierarchy. So, Damb, Sarah said, curious. What's it like? It's not just about fighting, Marcus explained, his accent no longer something he tried to hide. It's about honor, respect, and knowing when to use your strength. My grandfather always said, the hand that gives is better than the hand that takes, but sometimes you must use your hands to protect what matters. And what matters to you? She asked. My dignity, Marcus replied without hesitation. My family's honor, the right to exist without being tormented. He paused, then added, I should have stood up sooner. I let my fear of consequences override my self-respect. The cafeteria doors opened, and Brett walked in, his nose still bandaged, his usual swagger noticeably diminished. He saw Marcus and froze. For a moment their eyes met across the room. Then Brett looked away and hurried to a table on the far side of the cafeteria. Tyler and Jake followed, none of them even glancing in Marcus's direction. Do you think he learned his lesson? Sarah asked. Marcus shrugged. Maybe, maybe not, but he learned that there are consequences to his actions, and everyone else learned that being quiet doesn't always mean being weak. Over the following weeks, the dynamic at Westbrook High shifted. Brett and his crew kept their distance. Their reign of terror effectively ended. Other bullying incidents decreased as well, as if Marcus's stand had reminded everyone that victims didn't have to remain victims forever. Marcus joined the school's wrestling team, where his dambe training gave him a significant advantage. Coach Williams was thrilled to have him, especially after seeing his speed and technique. Where'd you learn to move like that? The coach asked after Marcus pinned his third opponent in a row during practice. My grandfather, Marcus said simply. He believed that strength without discipline is chaos. His grades improved now that he wasn't constantly looking over his shoulder. Teachers who'd previously seemed indifferent now made efforts to engage him. Mr. Peterson, the lunch monitor, who'd ignored the bullying, even apologized privately. I should have done something, he admitted. I was wrong to look the other way. Marcus accepted the apology gracefully, though he didn't forget. He'd learned that sometimes people needed to see strength before they respected it, and that standing up for yourself wasn't just about physical confrontation. It was about refusing to let others define your worth. One afternoon, as Marcus was leaving wrestling practice, he found Brett waiting by his car. Marcus tensed, ready for another confrontation, but Brett held up his hands in a gesture of peace. I wanted to apologize, Brett said, the words clearly difficult for him. What I did, especially with the backpack, that was... He trailed off, unable to finish. Inhumane, Marcus supplied. Cruel, disgusting. Brett nodded, his face red with shame. Yeah, all of that. I've been seeing a therapist and she made me realize I was taking out my own stuff on you. My dad, he's not exactly the easiest person to please, and I guess I thought if I was on top at school, it would make up for never being good enough at home. Marcus studied him for a long moment. An explanation is not an excuse. I know, Brett said quickly. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better, and that I'm sorry, really sorry. Marcus considered this. His grandfather had taught him about the strength in forgiveness, but also that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. I appreciate the apology, he said finally, but understand this. I will never allow anyone to treat me that way again. Not anyone. Brett nodded. I understand, and for what it's worth, that was some serious skill you showed. I've been in plenty of fights, but I've never seen anyone move like that. It's not about the skill, Marcus said. It's about knowing when to use it. I could have fought you that first day, but I chose not to. When you crossed the line, I chose differently. That's what real strength is. Choosing. As Brett walked away, Marcus reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. He'd gone from being invisible to being respected, from victim to victor. But more importantly, he'd learned something about himself. He'd tried so hard to fit in, to be quiet and unnoticed, that he'd forgotten who he was. The confrontation with Brett had reminded him that he was Marcus Okafor, grandson of a Dambe champion, son of survivors, and worthy of respect, not because he could fight, but because he was human. Sarah was waiting for him by the school entrance. Ready for chemistry study group? She asked. Always, Marcus replied, smiling, though I need to get a new backpack first. She laughed. Yeah, I don't blame you. That was seriously the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. I still can't believe they did that. People do terrible things when they think there won't be consequences, Marcus said. But there are always consequences, even if they take time to arrive. As they walked toward the parking lot, other students nodded or waved at Marcus. He wasn't popular in the traditional sense, but he'd earned something more valuable than popularity, respect. And he'd learned that sometimes standing up for yourself wasn't just about personal dignity. It was about showing others that they could stand up too. The sun was setting over Westbrook High, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Marcus thought of his grandfather, who'd passed away just before they left Nigeria. The old man would have been proud, not of the fighting, but of the restraint Marcus had shown for so long, and the wisdom to know when that restraint was no longer serving him. My grandfather used to say, Marcus told Sarah as they reached her car, that a warrior's greatest victory is not in defeating his enemies, but in turning them into allies. I don't know if Brett will ever be an ally, but at least he's no longer an enemy. And the others who stood by and did nothing? Sarah asked. They learned too, Marcus said. They learned that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Next time, maybe they'll speak up, maybe they'll step in, or maybe they'll just think twice before joining in the laughter. As they drove away from school, Marcus felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since arriving in America. He'd found his place not by hiding who he was, but by embracing it. The skinny Nigerian kid with the funny accent was gone, replaced by a young man who knew his worth and wasn't afraid to defend it. That night, Marcus told his mother everything. She cried when she heard about the backpack, held him when he described the weeks of torment, and finally smiled through her tears when he explained how he'd ended it. Your grandfather would be so proud, she said in Yoruba, their native language. You showed wisdom beyond your years, knowing when to endure and when to act. I was scared, Marcus admitted, not of Brett, but of disappointing you, of causing problems for our family. His mother cupped his face in her hands. My son, I brought you to this country for opportunity, but not at the cost of your dignity. You did the right thing. You stood up not just for yourself, but for everyone who's ever been bullied and felt powerless. Later, as Marcus practiced his Dambe forms in the living room, his little sister watching with wide eyes, he thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the streets of Lagos to the halls of Westbrook High, from silence to strength, from victim to victor, but most importantly, from trying to be invisible to proudly being himself. The forms flowed smoothly, each movement a meditation, each strike a reminder of the power he carried within. But now he understood what his grandfather had really been teaching him all those years. It wasn't about the ability to hurt others. It was about the strength to protect yourself and those who couldn't protect themselves. It was about knowing that true power came not from fear, but from respect. And respect, real respect, was earned not through violence, but through the courage to stand up when standing up was the hardest thing in the world. As he finished his practice, Marcus smiled. Tomorrow he would return to Westbrook High. There would be no more hiding, no more shrinking away. He was Marcus Okafor, and he had finally learned the most important lesson of all, that being different wasn't a weakness to be hidden, but a strength to be celebrated. And anyone who couldn't accept that would have to deal with the consequences of their ignorance. The boy who had walked into Westbrook High with his head down and his spirit crushed was gone. In his place stood a warrior, not because he could fight, but because he knew when to fight and, more importantly, when not to. That was his grandfather's true legacy, and one he would carry with pride for the rest of his life.